Hello, welcome to this first lesson in the course of Getting Started with Houdini, and we will learn how to create a procedural system or these kind of like interesting geometric structures that will be fully self-adjustable, fully like we tweak anything, it will rebuild itself. We can learn about the geometry containers, we'll learn about how to manipulate geometry, import things outside and inside, and how to actually set up everything in the stage context, how to render things, setting up our karma, setting up all our materials and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, buckle up. Finally, I just wanted to mention that if you are interested in getting the asset files or you just want to support the channel, please consider joining the Patreon, link in the description. And without further ado, let's get started. Hello, welcome to this first video in the series of Getting Started with Houdini, and in this lesson we will just create something that will look interesting, that will not take a lot of time, that will be not super hard or super involved, just to get ourselves acquainted with Houdini interface, how things are working, basically how to create some geometry and how to render it and how to have a pretty picture we can post on internet. Right, so first things first, let's go to File, Set Project. Oh no, actually let's create a new project. We go to Home, Work in Progress, and let's click Accept, and the project will be Getting Started with Houdini. Press Accept, File, Save File, so that in case we are getting lost, 1, accept, edit, and enable autosave. Now we are ready to go. So before you ask to get this type of backgrounds, I assume your background currently is light. It looks like something like this. So to change that, you can just hover your mouse over the viewport and press the D key, or press this I button, go to background, change it to dark or to gray. And I know that gray will be different on your side. That's because inside Effects Labs, in this little tab, if you don't have it, you press the plus, go to Shelves, enable, where is it? Side Effects Labs. Yep, here it is. And then you go to Preferences and Viewport Alternative Gray Background. It's a little bit darker, so I like it that way. Anyway, let's just begin with looking at the interface of Houdini. I know that there is probably a bit too many buttons for anyone to comprehend at the first glance. So if you're getting lost, don't be scared. But I know, well, for sure that someone can just create new tab, press here, do some stuff, maybe somehow change it, and you're immediately lost, right? So what am I supposed to do when I don't know what's happening, right? Things are out of whack. I have no idea. So go to this drop down where it says Build and say Reload Current Desktop. Everything will be back to normal. And yeah, so that will help you if you just mess up your viewport or mess up the interface. We will talk at length about interface, about how to, create new tabs, how to configure our interface. But for now, as your first endeavor into the Houdini, I think this will be fine. So now, how do we create geometry? There is a number of ways to create geometry. First, maybe kind of like most obvious one will be go to the tab, go to the create, let's say create a box, and if you just left click on a box, it will drop down the geometry, and as you can see, here will be the geometry container. Is there any other way? You can again left click on the box, press enter, and it will be created at the center of the viewport, or indeed at the center of our coordinate system. So it basically places in the 0, 0, 0 on all coordinates. As you can see, if I select this box here, in the transform information, the translation is -1 point something. In the y, it is almost 0.9, and in the z-axis, it's 0.5. However, the box that we created using the, again, left click, press enter, is everything 0. So I'll select with left mouse button drag, hit delete key, and everything is gone. Okay, so how do we create more geometry? We can hold down Control and just click, for example, on this tube or on the sphere, as you can see. Or indeed, we can right click here and create geometry. It will create a geometry container. We can then double click or press enter or press I. For now, I'll just double click. And again, we can right click here and start typing box, left click or just enter, and the box is created. So basically we did the same thing that we can do, just left click and control, holding down control, left click, it created the box. All right, so first geometry created, and the next part I want to say is, what is this context? As you can see, this context says it's the OBJ. It says objects on the top right of this tab. So we can also go to the channel, to the IMG, to the materials, shop, stage, tasks, you name it, out for rendering and stuff. However, if you left click, you can go back to objects. If you actually hold down left mouse button and drag, and then if you unpress the mouse button, it will immediately teleport you here. So it saves you a click, but you know, when you click billion times per day, I think it will save you, I don't know, 100 million clicks or something like that. Anyway, we have this box object and we can jump inside. As you can see, it has this contextual information that we went from OBJ into this box object. Again, we can go up one level if we press the U key, and in one level if we press the I, or enter. I, U, I, U. So I enabled the visualizer of what I'm actually pressing. In the bottom left, you can see that I press enter, I press U, I, U, you know. So that if you're getting lost, you will see here what I'm actually pressing down and jumping inside or outside, what exactly I'm clicking and what exactly I'm hitting what key. Anyway, so this box object container is just a container, right? So if we double click and go inside, we can see that we have a box. However, we can also have, for example, by the way, remember this, if you press tab and you can start like sphere, enter, enter, we will have a sphere. So that's probably the fastest way to create things. Pressing tab, start to type something like torus, enter, enter, we have a torus. However, as you can see, if we go back, we still see the box object. Why is that? Because we have this blue flag, the render flag, selected in our box object, which is inside the object container, geometry container. So to make it more obvious to you, I will press F2 or double click here and start typing arbitrary objects. Oops. So now it doesn't really need to be a box. We can press the blue flag here and it can be a sphere. If I go back, you can see that we have a sphere or torus or anything else. But what if we want to have everything? So there is this node that's called merge. So to basically create a merge, you press tab, start typing merge, and we have this thing. So basically we can select everything and get it to merge. and we press display and render on the merge, we can see that, it's a jumbled mess, but, at least we know that it works. So if we left click here on the box and press enter, we can now move around our box. Again, enter. Why I'm pressing enter is because sometimes Houdini does not know what you want to do, but it initializes the transformation if you press the enter. As you can see, we go back, we see our magnificent geometry inside. Okay, so how do we move our merge is not by going to Obj, context, and starting moving it here, because that's a little bit different. It's usually done in apps like, I don't know, Blender, Modo, or whatever, when you start moving everything at the geometry container level. But in Houdini, it's better to actually move it inside of the container itself. So we press tab, transform, press enter, left click, select, enable the render in view flag, and now we can move things around, which is really useful. However, as you might have seen, it kind of took a little bit more time that I would personally like. Actually, let's do just uniform scale, move it to the right, just for the sake of illustration. By the way, I navigate in the viewport by holding down spacebar, middle mouse drag, you will just stumble around, left mouse button, and will rotate against the object that was initially under your cursor. For example, let's see, I'm holding down spacebar, and I'm now rotating against the top left vertex of the box. And here I'll be rotating against the right vertex of the sphere. Really, really useful. And of course, zoom in, zoom out, holding down space bar, right mouse button, up and down, or left, right. So me personally, how I navigate is I hold down space bar, middle mouse, left mouse, right mouse, left to right. That's the fastest way. I know some people are preferring holding down the Alt keys. However, it's a little bit treacherous because Alt key sometimes does other things than just camera tumble viewport. So you'll be safer if you just use the space bar. And it's basically the same, but you don't have to press space bar. When we're talking about the node trees, we don't need to hold down space bar. So just middle mouse button, drag, will tumble around, right mouse button, will zoom in, zoom out. Again, it's faster than even scrolling. I prefer it that way. So that's probably the fastest way to move around. Okay, so next up, I wanted to actually talk about the transform. So to actually, first of all, I'll just show you how to delete the nodal connection. So you can connect things by left mouse button dragging here. You can disconnect by left clicking. You can actually connect not just dragging, but clicking. So that's all right. However, sometimes you need to disconnect, for example, all these three. So like a ninja, we can hold down the Y key. It will become scissors and do this. And as you can see, it's all is gone. So press Ctrl Z, it's back. So that's really, again, fast. And to join, you can hold down the J key and connect the same way. However, I kind of find this a little bit not as great as holding down the Y key, because Houdini is smart enough that it actually connects, as you can see, really far away. However, the join key doesn't do that. You have to be a little bit more precise. So Y key is a scissor that can destroy a nodal connection, and left mouse button drag brings it back. Anyway, I wanted to showcase the fact that there is a much faster way than just, right click here, type transform, go, click, place, So as you might have seen, we did not just, place transform and then connect it, because that takes a little bit too much of, clicking and dragging and whatever. The faster way, a little bit faster way, is you have seen you could be just right-clicking here and typing transform. Again, you can press enter, or you can just left-click and drop. It will be automatically connected. However, even the fastest way, if you have this selected, you just type tab, transform. As you can see, I did not have to type the transform. I just type transfer. That's enough. And after that, I press Shift Enter, and it's automatically connected. Again, for example, now that does nothing. Shift Enter. Again, transform, Shift Enter. Really useful, really fast. Okay. With that out of the way, let's actually start to create our scene, because again, I think now that we know a little bit how to move around in our viewport, how to drop some geometry down, we are good to go. Again, I can just delete this, nothing terrible will happen, and start typing geometry, enter, and create a box. Obviously we already had the box, but just for our personal benefit of learning how to do things, how to remember how to do things, that'll be good. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to copy elongated boxes on top of other geometry. We will be using a scatter node that will actually copy it. So how do we create the geometry that we copy to? Again, we can go to the objects and start, for example, hold down the control, left mouse button, grid, and we have this grid, and somehow we will, make this grid work with the box, but that's, a little bit more clicking that I want. Again, the more time you save clicking and, juggling your geometry out and about, the more time you will have to make amazing pictures. So, as you can see, again, I press tab, start typing grid, press enter. We have the grid. So I'll just display render the grid. By the way, you can just hold down R, do this, and as you can see, we will already be having the grid selected with the blue flag. Hold down E, we can see the preview, or actually the wireframe of the geometry that is with this purple flag. It's called template. Again, hold down E, we'll deselect it, and the only thing that we will see is our grid. Again, E for template. So whatever that we're actually going to do, we always will see the template geometry. Really useful to kind of see where your things are. Okay, so we have this grid. As you can see, since the Houdini is procedural and all that, we can actually make any changes to the initial geometry, and Houdini will be just, it's fine, it's okay, I'm procedural, I'm cool with anything. So what we're going to do now is we will introduce the node that is called copy to points. I'll press tab, stop typing, copy to points, as in CTP. And as you can see, copy to points, really useful. Again, we type just 3 letters and we already have this node. So on the left, we'll see the geometry to copy required. On the right, target points. So the target points will be actually these points. I will enable the points display. Again, I'll press D, go to guides. Okay, yeah. Point marker size 5. I think it will be, yeah. This looks a little bit more obvious to you now on YouTube because, video compression, all that. So what we have is all these points that I just showcasing you will be used to copy our boxes on top of them. So if we select both of these things, by the way, you're just going to, do this, enable. Again, we see our boxes. So that's all right. However, again, we can save ourselves at least 2 clicks if we select everything and just drop both of them, and it will be respectfully populate left one with the left node and the right this little connection with the right node. So that's cool. As we already see, our box is a little bit too big, I think. By the way, as you can see, currently the center of this box, for whatever reason, is 2 in the y-axis, I think because I moved it around and about. So what I'm going to do, I can just select this, hit 0, press enter. Or I can just hover my cursor here, press Control, middle mouse button, it will make everything default. So basically, if you do any sorts of things here, there, you just type something 3.5, whatever, it doesn't really matter now. Axis divisions, we can make everything default by just holding down left or right. I hold down left control, middle mouse button, everything, it will go back to defaults. All right, so we don't need so many axis divisions here. We can just go by 2, by 2, by 2. Because, the easier our box, the easier it will be for us to model with it. Anyway, so what I really want to do is hold the E key, click on the copy to points. Now we can see the wireframe of everything that we have. Reduce the uniform scale, as you can see. Now we have our boxes a little bit smaller. However, what I want with our boxes is to be elongated in height. So that's easily done. I actually can just move here, left mouse button drag in the viewport, or I can just hold down middle mouse here, over here, and just move my mouse up and down. By the way, if you can see, I'm moving my mouse vertically on this little ladder, and it actually defines the precision at which I'm increasing my y-axis of my box. Really, really useful, like super useful actually. All right, so if I now left mouse button and create the display flag onto my copy to points, as you can see, something really weird happens, right? Because our boxes are supposed to be, aligned vertically, but here they are aligned horizontally. We will talk about actual proper copying and alignments in further videos. For now, we'll just do transform and rotate. By the way, to make a bit more precise rotation, you have to hold Control, and as you can see, it will be in the increments of 45. So anyway, we transform our box, copied it to the points, and this looks okay. But there is a little bit of a problem. I want our boxes to be a little bit less evenly distributed on the plane of, ZX plane, right? So as you can see here, it's a little bit too perfect. So as we know, everything is being copied to the points. And now we just have to move our points about and around. How to do that? The easiest way and the most kind of like hands-off way will be pressing tab and dropping, and that's called mountain mode. What mountain mode does, it actually introduces some sort of noise, and with that noise, it moves the points around. So I will deselect this, make it something like 150 by 150, so it kind of is a bit more obvious to what is happening. And as you can see, it does kind of look like mountains, especially if we increase the rows and columns a little bit more. So it kind of looks like terrain, right? So the amplitude is how severe the terrain mountains are affecting. The displacement affects the points of our geometry. And the element size is the actual scale of our mountains. The fractal is how many actives it has. The roughness is how much difference within those actives between each and every iteration of the fractal. And linearity again. It's just all of which is to say that we are working with the visual severity, so to speak, of the noise affecting our geometry. So anyway, I'll go back to, let's say, 20 by 20. As you can see, everything is a little bit more coarse, but that's fine. What I want to do now is increase the amplitude to something like this, I think. And now, when we copy it to points, you will see that it is not so evenly distributed anymore. However, the points have normals, and copy to points respect those normals. And we can deselect that transform. It stops respecting this. And of course, it mitigates the transform that we did previously, right? So like we rotated it by 90, and if we now rotate it by 0, as you can see, it will be the way we want it, right? So I'll just press Control Z and show you another flag. If we disable this transformation, so to speak, we can left click on the bypass. And this node, despite the fact that it's still here, will be ignored, and everything will be according to our plans, basically. Okay, so again, I enable it by unclicking bypass and disable it by clicking bypass. By the way, you can have this transformation. So for example, if you want this transform somewhere on the left, you can do, let's say, for the organizational sake, we can left mouse button, hold and drag it to the left and connect our box directly to our points, which is basically saying that this node does nothing because we're watching at this node, and it's not being it does not interfere with how our box is oriented. If we connect it back, it will replace this connection, and as you can see, our transformation again affects our box. So what we can do is two things. First, again, connect it like that and move this and maybe even delete the connection. Or again, the easier way, and it's kind of interesting and relatively amusing. If you hold down mouse left button and just shake it, it will disconnect. There you go. You can connect it back by just drag and drop in it here, and you can shake it and move it away. So that's how you disconnect it. Okay. By the way, since we are in Houdini, we can increase the amount of rows and amount of columns. And indeed, if we press down on the grid, press enter, we can actually do something like this, which is to say that we are on the fly, in real time, we resize the actual size of the grid, as you can see. We can resize it something like here, something like that, and it will affect everything. The mountain will still be here, and the copy to point still be working. So all of which is saying that we can actually have this grid, different rows, so as we have different amount of copies. And indeed we can even have, let's say, torus. So if we connect torus, connect it to the mountain, you will see that our copies, they look kind of weird because the scale is not all that great. However, if we increase the radius, you will see that indeed our copies are in the torus. I gotta say, actually, this looks kind of cool. Maybe we'll stay with this way of copying our geometry. So again, we connect the grid, we have the grid. We connect the torus, we have the torus. We can connect anything. It doesn't have to be torus, grid, or whatever. If we press down test geometries co-op, you will see this co-op. If we now connect that to our mountain and copy the points, you will see if I increase the scale of our co-op, you will see that we actually have the geometry with our boxes copied to our co-op, which looks kind of interesting. So as you can see already, we have a really kind of cool looking geometry. We can tweak it. We can, by the way, transform it if we wish. So that's already looking pretty cool. But again, I don't want that. All I ever wanted is to have this grid with this mountain. Anyway, if I increase the amplitude of this mountain, you will see that our grid is getting really, really distorted, but it doesn't matter because all we wanted from this grid is those points to copy to. And as you can see, it has this result. I think I will increase the Y dimensions of our boxes so that it looks a little bit like this. I think it's okay. Maybe increase the amounts of rows and columns so they're stacked a little bit more closer to each other. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, I'll just delete this. We don't need this. By the way, the fastest way to arrange our network view is to just press the L key. As you can see, everything will be automatically laid out. So again, L to layout. L here will do nothing because we don't have anything yet, but if we have these copies, press L, it will be laid out in an orderly fashion. All right, go back to our geometry. Now what I want to do is I think I want to select everything, all the faces on the top, and create kind of like wireframe lights that float on top of our geometry. I think that will be looking pretty cool. However, we have to first find a way to select all the geometry, all the faces on the top. So how do we do that? We create a group. Again, I select left click, the copy to points, press tab, press group, shift enter. And as you can see, orange selects everything. However, all we need is to select the top faces. So the top faces can be selected, oriented by normals. So normals, what are those? Is if we enable the display primitive normals, you will see that we have those faint pinkish normals. Let me see if I can. Vectors. Okay, here we go. So as you can see, there's a lines that corresponds to orientation of our faces. So essentially, if we want to select a face that kind of looks that is on the top, we have to select normal, select the faces by normal that look to the y-axis from 0 to 1. So from bottom to top, that will be in y direction in the positive one. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so I go to the group. By the way, we can name this group however we want. Since we arbitrarily can name it by anything, I think this group name will be, I don't know, like Lincoln Park, because in the end, it doesn't even matter, right? Okay, so keep by normals. We press enable, and the direction, as you can see right now, it's in 0 in X, 0 in Y, and 1 in Z. In the bottom left, you can see this very, very small axis, as you can see. But if we decrease the spread angle, you will see that right now, the only selected faces are those that are looking, in our case, from left to right. So effectively in the z-axis, they look in the positive direction. But we need to look positive direction in the y. Again, the direction will be 0 in x, 1 in y, and 0 in z. And indeed, we have selected all of the faces that face upwards in our group that's called Linkin Park. Great name, by the way. All right, so what we're going to do now is we can indeed blast everything that is not selected by our group. I will disable the normals because we already see what we have. So as you can see, we have lots and lots of these little faces, and they are scattered all around the place. So how do we make the wireframes out of those? Indeed, there is a node that's called wireframe, but that's not the one we need. It's actually polywire. Now, again, if you learned the previous kind of little tip, how to make everything fast, you just can start typing PWI, Shift Enter, polywire. And as you can see, we have indeed created some sort of polywire, but the wire radius is a little bit too much. So I decrease that. Kind of like this, looks interesting. If we zoom in a little bit, it looks a little bit coarse. So the divisions is how many divisions it has in kind of the shape that goes in the wire. As you can see, if I have, for example, 3 divisions, 4 divisions, it looks like, well, basically each of the wire has 4 sides. And let's make it 10. 10 will do just fine. You can do whatever you want, but 10 will be fine. Okay, so how do we make this polywire and our Linkin Park group work together? So we can again merge them by typing merge, selecting those and connecting those. Again, I'll just say that the faster way will be just selecting those both, holding down the Alt key, and there you go. We already have the merge. However, we don't really see our polywires all that well. So what I want to do is transform. Tab, transform, enter, place it here, and move it a little bit up. As you can see, now we have our little light things that will be, when we render them, they will be contributing to the lighting of the scene. We have them above our, boxes. However, what we can do now is start working in a different object. So as you can see, I press the H to get back to our geometry. By the way, I forgot to say, if you're in your viewport and you're a little bit lost and you have no idea where you are, you just hold down space and press H, space home. So that will center everything around your scene. Really useful. Again, so now I'm just gonna call these our blocks, and I'll create another geometry. Hit the tab, Geo, enter, F2, lights, enter, enter. It does not have anything. So what we're going to do is press tab, merge. As you can see, there is this object merge. So we will merge our lights that we created in this object into this lights objects. Watch. So we have this merge here. We don't need this. I know that's might be a little bit confusing, but what we're going to do is have this group just, actually not the group. We'll have the copy to points just hanging around, and we'll call this, I press tab, call null, and call it in the caps blocks. So what it does is we created a null. Null effectively does nothing, but is helpful for organizational case like ours. Delete this merge. But just a reminder, we copied our boxes on the grid. We then created the group, Linkin Park. We blasted everything that was not in the Linkin Park. We polywire created then and transformed it on top. So what I want to do now is not actually use transform here, but we will create another null, F2, and call it lights. So you will see that if we now go back to our object context and go into our lights, enable those by the way, and we go to the object merge, I'll say the object of our interest will be lights. Okay, I go back to our blocks and actually enable the blocks here. So effectively, this thing, the lights are being exported, so to speak, in our geometry that's called lights. If I transform this, you'll see that indeed we have those in one object container and this, the blocks, in the other object container. So that's how we import and export geometry between object containers. Again, we will continue to work with this a little bit. So, you know what? What we're gonna do is we're gonna press Ctrl X. So to cut it from here, go to Object, go here, press Ctrl V, and actually merge in our blocks. If we merge the blocks and do all the grouping, all the blasting, all the polywire, we will end up with the result that we had in the previous. So basically, again, what we are doing is we are getting these blocks from here. We are importing them into our geometry that we called lights. We do the group, we blast everything, we polywire, and here we go, we have our lights. Basically, we don't have to have this null anymore because the only thing that we have is polywire. I can actually go in the top and hide other objects, and you will see that we indeed have our lights. All right, I'll just ghost other objects. We don't need to have to hide them actually. So what else can we do with those polywires? Again, we can just hold down transform, maybe move them a little bit upwards, maybe increase the uniform scale and compress them a little bit in the y-axis so that they are a little bit more uniformly like this. Okay, I kind of like that one. Maybe increase the uniform scale a little bit. And I think it will be interesting if we created another transform. I will hold down the Alt key, move it here. It will be having pretty much all the same that we had before, but I'll just rotate it 180 degrees in this axis and maybe move it a little. Whoa, what's happening? I'll move it a little bit down. Okay. And arrange that kind of like this so that we have lights on top and we have lights on bottom as well. So that's the only thing that we need to do now is connect these and these. Again, we select them both, hold down Alt, and it will actually merge our things. And we have our lights on top and we have our lights on bottom. Finally, I think we can do a little bit more of a background with a grid. We can just start typing geo, like geometry. But this, just for the sake of getting acquainted with the interface a little bit more, I will hold down the Control, left click on the grid, and as you can see, the grid has been created. I jump inside the grid and start manipulating it. First things first, we transform it. We move it on bottom. As you can see, I'm not doing it inside of the object context. I'm doing it inside the geometry container because it's easier for working with anything outside of super easy geometry like we're doing right now. I just wanted to make sure that you understand that the actual work on the geometry happens inside of the geometry container. And here, well, you can think about it mostly for your personal preference arrangement, right? Do not scale it here really, because it might mess up your, simulations, connections of geometry. There is this thing, I know that, again, I'll just stop on this a little bit so you understand a little bit better. Let's create a box. Let's jump inside of the box, actually hide other objects. No, you don't know what? We will ghost other objects, but we will disable the view on these objects. Again, Control Shift H, so we can center on our box. So if you have done anything in Blender previously, there is also this thing that you can transform things inside of Houdini, for example, and inside of Blender. Obviously, I'm talking about Blender. However, if we do the poly bevel, you don't have to, follow me right now. But what I'm trying to say is, if you make the scaling on your box before you applied poly bevel inside of the geometry container, the bevel will look just fine. However, if you go outside of the container and you start to actually scale your geometry container itself, where is it? You will see, yep, that our bevel is not looking good. I will go here, enable the smooth wire shaded, so you can see that it actually distorts. So the geometry container does not take into the account that we actually care about our geometry, right? It just, whatever comes in, even if it doesn't work that well, the container doesn't care. So again, I'll just go back to scale 1. Why I'm saying Blender? Because in Blender, it's common mistake to have this done again inside of not in the container, but actual transformation of the object. So as you can see, if we make our geometry manipulations before we do the bevel works just fine. If we do it in the context of geometry container, it destroys itself. So hopefully that is clear. All right, select our things and go back to our work in progress. Okay, so I transformed our geometry. Now I want to make it a little bit bigger. And again, I think I will make just a little bit of a mountain, nothing too drastic. Amplitudes maybe somewhat higher. However, before I do that, I want to divide it into triangles. You can do it by typing divide. And before we do the mountain, I just dropped the divide node. And as you can see, it divided our quads, here they are, into the triangles. All right. And finally, we'll mount in a little bit. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to extrude each and every face. So it's called poly extrude, PXTR, Shift Enter, poly extrude. So if I do the extrusion right now, you will see that everything is being extruded, and that's not exactly what I want. What I want is not connected components, but individual components. As you can see, the individual components have been extruded now. Each face has its own extrusion. And I think we will do a little bit of an inset so that we see that it is indeed being extruded on its own. All right, I think distance 0.2 will work. You can do, you can make any distance you personally want. I just do it, by heart, by hand, by my eye, whatever it is. Just to have something, really interesting. I look at this, I don't think I like it. What I want to do is remesh. I want to just have, triangles looking a little bit randomly. And the remesh does exactly that. It remeshes the geometry into the random triangles. Maybe, whoops, that's a little bit too much. 2, 3, 5. Yeah, 5 looks okay. So we do this remesh and we point the remesh into the mountain. As you can see, we have those triangles out and about. And finally, we do the poly extrude. And now it has this effect that I really, really wanted. Again, I think I will make this a little bit bigger. Kind of like this. Maybe move it slightly closer to our installation, so to speak. Okay. And now we have our grid. Actually, I'll go back to the grid and move it a little bit like this. I think it is our time to start creating a camera and to start kind of thinking about how we're going to render this. So to create a camera, you can, on this shelf of lights and cameras, you can left click, drop down the camera. As you can see, something already happens. So what is it? We can see that we are having this 16:9 red border, and it means that we are indeed inside our camera. So if I now rotate, you will see that the camera has been created, and here it is. A little bit small, but here we are. It's our camera. So naturally, the obvious, super obvious way to actually move our camera about will be kind of like, this, that, you can transform it. However, there is, in my opinion, a better way. You can go here, it says no camera. We can look through the camera number 1, and if we press the lock icon, it will actually, however we navigate inside of our viewport, will be how our camera will be positioned. So if I make it like this, our camera will be positioned according to our viewport. So that is really, really useful. Okay, I think I kind of like this one. Do not forget to uncheck the lock camera, because if you start tumbling your viewport around, the camera will start moving out and about as well. Again, you can just go back to your camera by pressing camera 1 here. And if you are not having the lock key to camera and lights, you just, if you go outside of your viewport, if you just stumble around in your viewport, you'll go outside of your camera, so that's all right. All right, so I guess final thing is we can start tweaking our render. And in this instance, I wanted to showcase the new way of rendering our things. That'll be inside of the stage. So we go to our stage and voila, there's nothing. You're like, wait a minute. We just create all our stuff. Why isn't there anything here? Previously, when Houdini was, let me go back to the object. When we were rendering just with Mantra, we can just go to render view, press render, and definitely something will start happening. It will not look, super great, but with the minimum effort, we actually have all of our stuff already and ready for rendering. But now we have this new stage context, which actually is UASD, as in Universal Scene Description, native format. So we have to import our things again. So type scene import all, shift enter, and we can see that we already have it. So here, our camera was imported as well. Our geometry was imported. And if we, for example, have our, let's say environment light, if I hold the control and left mouse button, we'll have some sort of environment light, and we go to environment map, and maybe go to Houdini PKHDRI, we can have this environment map. As you can see, definitely there is some environments around. If we go inside of stage, this environment will be imported as well. So that's just saying that this USD thing, it is, the Karma renderer is a USD native render engine. However, the geometry that we create inside of our object context, or indeed DOP context or any other context, is not USD native. So what happens is when we import our things in scene, it actually converts it into the USD native geometry container. I know it's a little bit confusing, like why is this happening? But the gist of it is that the geometry here is just native geometry of Houdini, and the stage context has to be USD native. So this kind of little node tries its best to convert everything into the USD native container. Hopefully this makes at least a little bit of sense. We will cover this and many other topics, by the way, in more detail later, so it kind of makes more sense. But for now, just trust me, you don't need to know this, so just whatever. Let's do our thing, okay? All right, so the only problem I see is that when we go to our stage, the normals do not look all that good. So we go to our objects, go to our blocks, and we do the normals. Here we go. Cusp angle, doesn't really matter, 27, whatever. Okay, so now normals should look good. Go back to stage, and indeed the normals on our blocks are looking good. However, this, where is it? Grid object, it does not look all that good. So why is this happening? Is because Houdini assumes the normals, but it actually doesn't have any normals yet. So this is a little bit of a thing with Houdini. If something is not explicitly told to be had, for example, even normals, Houdini will not actually assign, normals for rendering purposes. As you can see, if we make the cusp angle to 180, it looks kind of blobby, not really well defined. However, if the cusp angle is, I don't know, like 2 or something, it looks really, really sharp, and that is exactly what I want. Okay, I think we're ready to go to our stage and finally start thinking about rendering and materials. All right, so first things first, what we're gonna do is drop the Karma, Shift Enter, and we have our Karma node. So we can say that it's gonna be CPU engine, XPU engine, or whatever. By the way, XPU engine for now works only on NVIDIA GPUs. You have to have somewhat recent GPU to actually utilize the Houdini Karma XPU render. So how do we switch to rendering? We go to here from perspective to Karma, and it will start rendering. In my case, I think it's a little bit harder to see, but it says optics in it. It means that it loads the kernels for GPU under rendering, and as of right now, it was rendering just with the CPU. However, when my GPU, my NVIDIA GPU was added to the rendering performance, as you can see, it's really, really fast. So that's pretty cool. Now, we have to apply some materials. Again, material library. Drop it here. We go inside. Start typing tab. By the way, we will talk at length about materials and everything else. For now, if you are not like super proficient in Houdini yet, just follow me. It will be like a learning experience for all of us as of right now. However, all I'm saying is I will cover rendering in much more detail. Materials, Karma XPU, CPU, principled, material X will cover everything. So what we need is a surface. So we go, tap, surface, material X, standard surface. And what we can do now is just drag and drop this one onto grid object 1 component. And go back to our material library, and I will rename it to background grid. Again, you can name it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But for convenience, I don't want to forget which is which, because it will be like material 1, material 2, material 3. I don't remember which is which, so I'll just rename it right now. You can create copies of those materials, like you can create copies of anything else inside of Houdini. Just hold down the Alt key and left mouse button dragging. All right, so this one is going to be those little things. It's a little bit hard to get a hold of them. Okay, lights, and we call them lights materials. And finally, blocks components. We name this blocks. Okay, so what do we want? We want our background grid to be a little bit darker, so the base color will be something like this, I think. The light materials should be actually emission, so we increase the emission. For now, we just call it 1. And the blocks will be a little bit... Actually, when we will be rendering, we'll figure out how the blocks will be looking. So for now, all I'm gonna do is get this assigned material, enable the karma, and let's see what we have. Okay, so what do we have? Grid object is with grids, print is lights is with, this is a little bit wrong. So what we're gonna do is go into the materials and apply lights. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And blocks. Okay, let me check. I don't know what's happening, but everything is a little bit wrong. Okay, so give my GPU a little bit of time to be initialized, and we go back to our, go back to our materials. Let's start tweaking the lights colors. As you can see, everything works as intended. I think for now we'll have something like this. Materials, background grid. Let's see if it works in XPU, and it works in XPU as well. Okay, great. So background grid should be darker, I think. Light materials, fine just as they are. And this base color, I think, kind of like, you can follow this at this point, you can follow not, it doesn't really matter. All we're gonna do is go through the camera number 1 and see what we have. I will just move a little bit to disable the camera. And this is what we got. So finally, what I'm gonna do is go to our objects and start tweaking our geometry a little bit. I think if we have our grid object displaced a little bit, it will be slightly more interesting. By the way, if you remember, I told you previously that everything that we had was, that we were doing was pretty much procedural. So if we now, for example, increase the radius of our torus, and instead of grid we connect our torus, we will indeed see that we have our geometry that's being copied onto the torus. Whoops, my bad. Blocks, torus, let's increase the rows or columns or both. It doesn't really matter. And increase the radius. You will see that our lights are rebuilding themselves again. So if we go back to our stage, we will see that we now have much of different kind of layout because we are copying things onto the source. But grid works just fine for me. So, oops, blocks. And okay, yeah. So go back to our stage and see how we can improve it from there. So what I think what we're going to do is we are going to delete the environment light from here. We delete the camera from here, and we recreate those inside of here. So again, I'll just position everything how I want it to look. Hold down left control, left mouse button, click the camera, and navigate a little bit inside of my viewport. Next up, we have to have our environment back, but in Karma it's called dome light. Yeah, our dome light. Enable that, and we go to our texture and bring back our Lilong 12K. Right, so we can tweak the intensity of this light higher, lower. I think this will do just fine. As you can see, if we lower it a little bit, we can see that our light indeed is lighting up our geometry that we have. I think as a final thing, we can go to our objects, create a huge box. Again, hold down the control, left mouse button. Here is our box object. And here, finally, I can use that to increase the scale. And as you can see, uniform scale 356. We go inside of this box object and we actually convert it to VDB. It says VDB from polygons. And make it not surface but density. And that's it. So we had our box and we have our conversion to VDB, and that should be working just fine if we go to our stage. Let's see what we have. We have to have the material library first. Go back and create the Pyro preview. And Pyro preview should be applied to our box. Let's see if we can manage to do that. Box object components. Okay. This should do the trick. Let's see. I will move assign material here. Actually, let's move everything before Karma so that the second to last object will be always our Karma settings. And we do the Karma enable. Okay. Look through the camera. Decrease the density quite a bit. As you can see, our fog was a little bit too much. Density scale 0.01. Let's see if it looks all right. Again, a little bit too much, maybe 0.02. Intensity of dome light is a little bit too much. All right, so that looks almost okay. Resolution will be HDTV. Finally, I think we can create a couple of lights. Whoops. Something like here, lights. Okay, I think we can create area light like here. Look through the lights, number 1. Let's see where we are actually right now. Okay, yeah, that's all right. So that's area light 1. If we now look through the camera, we can see and tweak the exposure and intensity. All right, this looks kind of almost how I want it. The only thing is, let me see. maybe we'll have another light going from the right. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going back to the Houdini GL because this rendering is a little bit too much for me. And I'm going back to the OBJ. I will disable the box object and go back to our stage. That will be a little bit easier to work with. All right, so make the color a little bit more orange-ish. And I will copy it, place it here, press enter, and move the lights here. Rotate it 180, so it kind of looks from the left, and make that color instead a little bit more bluish. Kind of like cyberpunk and all that. Okay, so is there anything we want to do next? Let's see. Preview with our camera renderer. Look through the camera number 1. The only downside of rendering with Karma XPU is that it initializes the optics, it loads out the kernels a little bit too much for my liking, and then it loads them back, and we will see more difference, I'm guessing, OBJ, if we enable back our fog object. So let's go back to the stage and see what we have with our lights. So I'll just disable it, go back to our stage, and everything will be fast. Right, cool, finally. This is looking fine. The only thing I want to maybe improve is actually have our background grid to have a little bit more metalness and maybe a little less rough, so it kind of reflects a little bit more things around it. What else? Do I want to do anything else? Yes. Finally, we go to the object. Go to our lights objects. Oops. And I think we can transform that to take a little bit more space. Again, you don't need to do this, but if you follow step by step, I don't think it will hurt. So this takes a little bit more space, and for now it's illuminating too much. So I go back to our material library, and I think we can decrease the emission. I think we can decrease the base color, and we can increase the transmission, so it's kind of they kind of look like actual lights that go through. That's pretty much it. I think we can lower the emission a little bit more, even still. All right, so this looks kind of interesting. I think the only thing I want to do is decrease the intensity of our lights on the left because it's a little bit too much. Again, back to our material library. Slightly increase this. And this is pretty much it. The only thing we can do now is just go back to the Houdini GL, press Ctrl S to save everything, and render to in play and see the results. Honestly, I understand that this might have been a little bit too much. It's kind of like a dive inside of Houdini head first, and hopefully you had a little bit of fun learning stuff. If it's a little bit too much for your first Houdini learning experience, I understand, but that's all right. You don't need to be, ashamed of not understanding anything and everything. But what I'm going to say is that we will cover a lot more and in a lot more kind of like detail. It might be a little bit more theoretical at some points, but I'll try to cover pretty much everything you need to know to work inside of Houdini and to have to, with the result of having renders inside of Houdini, or indeed when we are exporting to Unreal Engine and work from there. So if you are interested in learning the procedural workflows using Houdini and Unreal Engine, I personally think that understanding all of the fundamentals is important for the success of you as a 3D artist, especially in the world of Houdini, where understanding things like attributes, a little bit of simulations here and there is really, really important. So again, thanks for watching. If you find this interesting, if you want to learn more about Houdini, don't forget to subscribe and see you next video. Bye-bye.